So I'd like to invite the next panel to join us on the stage. There's Mick Brown, who's chairing it. So I don't know Mick. Oh, hello Mick. When I looked you up, because I can find you in my notes, I gather you're not the angler. There's a Mick Brown, who's an Anglo journalist and specialist in Tibetan Buddhist and people to join us on the stage. And Levine and Andrew as well. This is a fascinating panel because recently 2 books have appeared looking at Freeda Bedi, and books which are very different. And I'll give you back the microphone in a moment. Just introducing them. Andy, you heard speak yesterday, is an academic and a journalist. Worked on Kashmir, and he's written one of the books which is available, I believe, in the bookshop here, which is open all day today. And Naomi has written, and Andrew is as you know, has been a BBC journalist and written about Kashmir, and so his is about political and spiritual aspects of Freeda. Naomi has written many books on Buddhism. So I'm looking forward to hearing the 2 of you engaging in very different approaches to this wonderful figure of Freeda Bedi.
Hello. Well, I'm not an angler, actually. There is a Mick Brown who is an angler. And there's another Mick Brown who's a rock drummer for a group called Dokken. And I'm afraid I'm neither of those Mick Browns. But I'm a journalist and an author. It's a pleasure to be here. I promise you we're going to be in for a very interesting discussion. As my friend, sorry, I don't know your name, but Rachel, sorry. As Rachel explained, we've got 2 people here who've written very different books about the same subject. And that's particularly interesting because they're both coming from very, very different directions and very different fields of interest. And the woman who they've written about, Freeda Bedi, extraordinary woman, who a friend of hers described as a romantic looking for a noble cause. And he found it, first of all, in socialism and political activism, then in the Indian struggle for independence, and finally in Tibetan Buddhism. So she led a very rich and very extraordinary life. And both of these books come from quite different subjects. So at the end, I'm afraid you're going to have to buy both books. If you can get a very complete picture of Freeda Bedi. Thank you. What I'd like to do first of all is to ask both of our guests here, Andrew and Norma, to begin by telling us what first interested them in Freeda. And I think in their answers, I think you're going to find 2 very, very different reasons why they both engage with this subject. No, let's begin with you. Okay. Why did you want to write this book? What interested you about Freeda Bedi?
Well, all the books that I write, I have to say, are on things that seem to happen that are beyond my control. So I don't kind of go looking for something because it has to come to me. So in this case, it was quite strange because my background from the time that I met the 16th Karmapa in 1976 turned towards Buddhism. So eventually I met my guru and I was building a house on his land, a retreat house in India, in Sherabling, Himachal Pradesh. And I stayed there for 5 years. While I was there, the attendant of Freeda Bedi, who had died in 77, this was 1981, she died in 77, and Pela Zangmo, a Tibetan woman, was building a nun's retreat, and she used to come to me frequently in the evening and tell me in gasps, and she was still kind of like sort of reeling from this extraordinary experience that she had, and she was telling me about Mummy Love, and her Divine Mother, and Holy Mother, she called her, and she was telling me about her kind kind of supernatural death, okay, which I won't go into right now. But, so I tucked this away in my mind and didn't go any further because nobody seemed to corroborate this. Then many decades later, I was writing or editing some stories, compiling stories on the 16th Karmapa, and then I met Freeda Bedi, the eldest son of Freeda, and he invited me to stop in at his house in Bangalore and talk about, well, I thought it was going to be the 16th Karmapa, but instead he started talking about his mother and showed me some of the archives, and I didn't have time, and I wasn't even thinking of writing a book on her. But before I left, he said, the ball is in your court if you want to write a book about mummy. So I thought about it, and that's how it started. The first line of my book, I'll just tell you this, is I met Freeda Bedi not in her life, but in her death. And that's how it started.
So there you are, you're coming very specifically from a position of your own personal belief and conviction.
That's right, yeah.
Andrew, you're coming from a very different position. It wasn't Tibetan Buddhism and Freeda was a Tibetan Buddhist that first drew you to it.
No, I mean, I recognise how important that was in her life. And when you mentioned that Freeda became a Tibetan Buddhist nun, and also that her son is a Bollywood star, those are the two things which capture attention. But I came in a very different way. So I'm a historian as well as a journalist, and 15 years ago or so, I was doing a lot of research on what happened in Kashmir in 1947-48, and trying to get personal testimony, oral history, to challenge the rather ossified and competing narratives about Kashmir in 1947. And I met quite a lot of elderly Kashmiris who, in their youth, of which they were still very proud and excited, had been progressive, small c, capital C communists, who were achieving political and social change in Kashmir. And they spoke, especially the women among them, and there was quite a lot of women's activism in Kashmir at that time. People forget that, but there was. They spoke about this, this English woman, beautiful, blue-eyed, fair-haired, who was on their side, who spoke Urdu, not very well, but spoke Urdu, who was an activist, who joined the women's militia. There was a left-wing militia in Kashmir in late 47, early 48. And they told me stories about how she would sometimes dress in a burqa to go incognito in Kashmir, as unlikely as that sounds, to deliver messages to the underground. The underground were the people who were fighting against the Maharaja at that time. And that caught my attention, and I was actually in touch with the family at that time because I just wondered did they have any diaries or anything like that. And I sort of lodged it away, and the more I found out about Freeda, the more there was a sort of, it struck a chord with, actually with my own life. So, she's from the north of England. Well, you can argue about it, but you know, I'm from the north. She went to a grammar school, yeah. She got to Oxford, yeah. She was involved in left-wing politics as a student, yeah. She spent a lot of her life as a journalist, yeah. She married an Indian, yeah. She was engaged with Kashmir, yeah. She brought up her family in Delhi, well, not to the same extent, but yes. So all those things, I mean, there are profound differences as well, as Mick has indicated. I'm not a Buddhist, and I found it, quite a challenge to try and get my head into that part of her life. But when you actually think about what she did at Oxford, she broke social convention by marrying a Punjabi student and was disciplined for it. She became an Indian from the moment she married a Punjabi. By the time she arrived in India a year later, not only was she accustomed to wearing salwar kameez and a sari, but she and her husband had edited 4 books about India before setting foot in the place, 3 of which were published by Victor Galance. She was jailed by the British, as was her husband, but separately. She courted arrest. She fought, I mean, when I say fought, I mean it in a political sense, but she did learn how to fire a rifle, though she never did it in anger. She fought as a Kashmiri nationalist. And then there was the remarkable turn to Buddhism, and to embracing the 16th Karmapa Lama as her guru. But throughout her life, she refused to be constrained by barriers of race, religion, nation, and indeed gender. And that I thought actually spoke to us today when we're so absorbed with identity politics.
As you say, she came from the north of England, and there's a very interesting trajectory to her life, which can be read in two ways. And it can either be seen as a political trajectory, or it can be seen as a trajectory towards a spiritual realization, a spiritual combination. Norma, tell us something about her childhood, and if you will clarify, divide, unite these two disparate elements. What's going on when she's a young woman? I mean, she comes from a very humble family. Her father is a watchmaker or a seller of watches. She goes to Oxford, as Andrew says, and has a political awakening. But at the same time, is there also a theme of sort of spiritual development, spiritual life, spiritual yearning that's going on at the same time?
Yeah, there certainly is. As Mick says, I approached it from a different angle, and I was very shocked. Well, let's say my first impression of Freeda was in photographs with the 16th Karmapa. And in those photographs, she was already a nun, and she was, you know, she had the demeanor of a Mem Sahib. So I always thought of her as a vestige of the British Raj, and that she was somewhat of an elitist. That's what I thought before I knew anything about her at all, just in photographs. When I came to go to the place where she was born, well, she had a normal childhood up until the age of 7, if you can call normal having been born on a place called Monk Street, and then ending up as a nun herself. So, I mean, these were significant signposts for me. But when I went to the actual place where she was born, I was quite impressed by the fact that it was certainly a working class area. And certainly she did not come from a family with any privileges whatsoever. So then I asked myself, how on earth did she ever get into Oxford? She had no background, although she was very bright and quite bookish. But anyway, before I go into that, there was a significant thing, very, very significant thing that happened to her when she was aged 7. The only prosperity in the family, I should say, came from her maternal grandfather, who was a coal contractor in the Peak District. So their life became, they moved up, they were upwardly mobile. In fact, Barbara Castle said that the family had values of which Margaret Thatcher would have been proud.
So this is Barbara Castle,
who was a friend of hers in the Oxford days and continued to be a friend throughout her life. And also, as Harold Evans called it, she was from the respectable working class. So they were, on the way up, and then they moved, to better and better accommodation. There's this scene in my mind where they were drinking, she describes it, they were drinking tea in the drawing room of Wade House, which is very small. I mean, you wouldn't call it a drawing room. I went inside it. That was the upwardly mobile house. And in a, middle, maybe lower middle class neighborhood. But they were drinking a tea, and then suddenly there was an explosion. Boom. And at that point, all the cups rattled, and her mother said that must have been a bomb. That was a bomb, and it fell on the station. So it was, German, it was World War I. And Derby was being bombed. Now that shattered her childhood world, which was the world of a simple country girl. Making daisy chains, skipping down country lanes, eating freshly churned butter and crusty bread, and just having, picking blackberries and mushrooms. I mean, all this was, normal childhood, and then suddenly, bang, her father was called off to serve in the Sherwood Foresters, and it had a very high fatality rate. He was killed in the Battle of the Marne, just months before the war ended, and Freeda never had a father, basically. She said the word father was always an abstraction for her, and when Poppy Day was celebrated on November the 11th, she nearly fainted every time. And so I think she was looking for a father figure of her life, and she got it. She definitely got it.
So do you think,
Yeah.
and actually, I welcome your thoughts on this, do you think in a way Baba Bedi, as much as he was her husband, was the father figure she was looking for? Certainly we could extrapolate the 60-Karmapa, who she met later on in life as her father figure. Would you agree with that thesis?
I think I do agree, actually, very much that she was seeking for her spiritual quest, which was evident throughout her life, became particularly pronounced towards the end of her life, was, I mean, I don't want to explain in a spiritual affiliation away, but I think a large part of it was trying to come to terms with the trauma of her father's death. And she sort of couldn't remember her father. So her father was 7 when she died, but he'd been away for 3 years at war. So she was 4 when she was last with him. And she struggled with, could she actually remember him? Remember him playing in the living room and remember him in the garden? Or were those things that she'd been told? So they were, in a sense, second-hand memories. And she also talked about there was a picture in her living room in Derby. Do you know the Civil War painting where a young aristocrat is being questioned, and the sort of I think the picture is generally known as, when did you last see your father? Well, that was the very curious choice of painting in their living room for a family which had lost their father. So I think all that was evident. I don't think Baba Bedi was part of that quest. I mean, she fell in love with Baba Bedi. Their meeting was quite, they were both doing the same course. We're hearing about third-class degrees. Actually, Freeda got a 3rd. Baba Bedi got a 4th-class degree. It doesn't exist anymore. It does suggest rather a lack of scholastic discipline. But he got it. Freeda found Oxford intoxicating. It was internationalist in the way that Derby in those days simply wasn't. Left-wing politics was prevalent. She went to the Nationlist, she went to the October Club, which was the communist students grouping, she went to the Labour Club. She changed from French to doing PPE, politics, philosophy and economics. And at one of those lectures, she arrived early to find there was an Indian student also arriving very early. And she was quite a shy person at that stage in her life. There was a touch of the men's side later, but at that stage she was really quite private. And she thought, I've got to acknowledge this Indian student, otherwise he'll think I'm ignoring him because he's Indian. So she said, good morning, made some small talk. And he was reading a newspaper, and he just put his newspaper down and said, good morning, and acknowledged, and they carried on reading. And he'd been clearly a little bit boorish, and he realised it. So a couple of days later, he sent a note to her saying, would you like to come round for a cup of tea? Which she did, and obeying the rules, at least at that time, with a chaperone. And from there, a friendship developed, which was an intellectual collaboration. I mean, she was really taken by what was happening in India. She was taken by the lack of justice. She was taken by the way in which India policed empire. And she couldn't help but notice the way in which India sought, I mean, Indian nationalists and leftists were operating under some sense of threat.
I mean, it was unusual at that point for an English girl to marry an Indian man. How was that received? How was that received by her family?
Not well at all. It wasn't received well at all. In fact, when they got married in this, what she calls a drag registry office in Oxford, only his cousin, Bedi's cousin, attended. Her mother and stepfather also attended. But when she came to breaking the news to her mother, it was psychologically traumatic for her. Her mother took it okay, but there was a rift. There was something that didn't quite go that well. Her mother still had this kind of feeling that, apart from anything else, she was going to lose her daughter, who was going to live in India. So that didn't go down very well. And Bedi felt it all his life. He said that there was a rift caused by her mother, even though she went over there once to see her mother-in-law and her daughter, of course. But one thing is that Oxford didn't accept it either. It was an interracial, premarital sexual relationship, which then turned into a marriage, and it was made the newspapers, you know. So it was kind of like a very daring thing to do. But one thing I have to say, which I forgot about in terms of her early life, was this is very significant. Because her mother turned away from God after the death of her husband, whom she considered to be a saint. So she thought, if God can take away such a saintly man as this, then there is no God. So she became a liberal atheist. And like everybody else, celebrated Christmas and sent her children to a good Christian school and brought them up as good Christians, but she didn't believe any longer. So Freeda was then free to choose her own belief system, and she was always interested in religion. She would go into the chapel, St. Peter's Chapel, early in the morning before school and sit in meditation for an hour every day. And what was she looking for? A direct experience with the divine. So she wasn't looking for dogma. She wasn't looking for rules. She wanted to know what it was directly.
Well, come to that a little later on. If I could just return to the fact of the marriage, it was no more welcomed by the Bedi side of the family, was it, Andrew? I mean, there was deep reservations and doubts and disapproval on that side of it.
There was until Freeda turned up in person wearing a cotton sari and touching her mother-in-law's feet. Right. But initially, a great deal of, not so much scepticism, but simply don't do that. Actually, I don't think I've mentioned this to you when we were chatting yesterday, but when my book came out, Rangus, the oldest of the children, said, "You must meet my cousin. I teach for 2 months every year in Chennai at the Asian College of Journalism, and the cousin was in Chennai." So a couple of months ago, I met him and his wife for a meal, very pleasant. And his wife said, "Do you know, when we were sorting out the family house in Delhi some years back, we came across a letter that Freeda had written to her brother-in-law to be. Are you interested?" I finished the book, but yeah, of course I'm interested. And she gave me a copy of this letter, which, it's a reply, but the context seems to be, so Baba Bedi, who she married, was the younger of two brothers. Their father died young. So the head of the household was his older brother, T.D. Bedi, who was quite conventional, Indian civil service and a magistrate. And Baba seems to have written from Oxford to his brother saying, "I'm not going to do the ICS exams. I'm a communist, I'm a nationalist. And by the way, I've met an English woman and I'm going to marry her." The brother-in-law, T.D., seems to have written back saying, "Not what we sent you to Oxford for, knock it off. And when you come back, leave her behind." Freeda replied. She's 21 when she wrote this in the spring of 1933. If I may, I'll just please read a little bit of it. So, "Dear brother, I believe you to be a fair-minded man. Your letter, in spite of its disappointments, has not shattered this belief, which Pyare Lal has given me in the first place. Because of this, I have a great trust that we shall in the end completely understand one another. I know how it must seem to you when your dearly loved brother makes a decision to marry someone who is a stranger to your land, to your family, and to your race. The very same thing has happened in my own family, when my dearly loved mother has had such a struggle. Many a time, although I never flinched in my decision, I cried myself to sleep at night, remembering just little before unnoticed kindnesses that mother had done for me. And I thought that the day might come when I should have to make a choice between her and all my home associations and Pyare and a country which I loved but had never yet seen. God has spared me that heartbreaking choice, but if it had to come, it would have been for the man I love and India that I should have decided. I don't want to label my sacrifice because I'm so rich in the love of Pyare Lal that all else seems insignificant. By love, I mean all the glory of the tender, strong, passionate, peaceful, contented, self-forgetful love of woman for man. I do not believe man was created to live without woman. As you love your brother, Balasai, so I love your brother. That you are man and I am woman, and while our love in its strength must be the same at the core, for me there is also another complexion to it. I see in Pyare Lal the father of my children, and I tremble to the passion of tenderness when I think I shall one day suckle his son at my breast. None but the finest children could be born of the spirit which unites us and the strength of our bodies. I can never be an Indian woman and cannot give him pure new children. Would that alone prejudice you against them? Pyare and I are one country in spirit, and colour is unimportant beside that. I was not brought up in an easy school. I do not ask ease from the future. I want to serve, and to serve as best a woman can by the side of her husband and children. I repeat, there's one thing I can't do, become an actual Indian woman. And I know full well that some woman of his own race will miss a perfect husband in Pyare. But my spirit is with India and not with England, with Pyare and not with a man of my own country. My children will be an even greater bond, my clothes another. Would you deny me your perfect understanding for something I cannot help? It just happened that I was born in England, but it also happened that my soul is not in this country, but in another.
That's extraordinary. My spirit is with India. Norma, tell us, when her body was reunited with her soul, they finally came together in India, what happened? How did she immerse herself in this, in the family, in the world, and how was she received?
Well, as Andrew suggested, it was an extraordinary homecoming. They had travelled for 3 weeks by boat to Mumbai.
This is from Berlin, so
they came from Berlin, but actually they left from Trieste. Mm. So they took a boat, of course, and they arrived in Mumbai with the gates of India, and the imperial gates of India, and they were searched, body searched, even the baby's nappy was searched. Freeda was still breastfeeding, and her sari was soiled. They got on a train and they had to go another 1,000 miles to get to his village in the Punjab. So they arrived sometime, I don't know how many days later, but it must have taken a good, a couple of days. And they arrived in the evening and they walked up a flight of stairs and they came into a extended family home. And there was the mother-in-law, Babuji, they called her, and Freeda went and put her head at her mother-in-law's feet, and she got a tremendously warm hug from her, and they sat her down and put a cloth in front of her into which everybody put sugar and coins, which is the traditional way of greeting a bride. And they presented her with a beautiful new Punjabi outfit. The music was playing. There were delicacies, Punjabi delicacies that she was offered. Music went on until the early hours of the morning, and she remembered this homecoming. So it was so much in her mind that many years later, when she became a nun, she told the leader of the Sakya school of Tibetan Buddhism, His Holiness the Sakya Trees, and she told him about it. And he told me that this was an event that she never forgot, how she was treated by the family. She was completely accepted. And interestingly, when Baba came to write his memoirs, or record his memoirs, he said from the time that he brought Freeda into the family, it became a very united family. So it was as if she was Cinderella, and her foot fitted the slipper, the glass slipper. It was as if they needed this component to make a complete family. So she learned Punjabi, and I guess Hindi, and then Babuji lived with them until she died in was it, 58. I think Babaji died in 58. That meant that she was living with them for about 20 years. And Freeda was taking care of her the whole time through her sickness. They never had money, so it wasn't like they were living in a villa or a fine house or anything, because he had given up all his claim to the family property because he was a communist. so, you know, he took it seriously. And then, you know, she said that Babaji had nurtured her. She was a pillar of strength in the family. They had an uncommon relationship. And when her mother, Freeda's mother, came from England to visit after, I don't know, a few years they had been there, on her departure, her and Babaji hugged each other, and she said to her mother-in-law, "Tell Freeda to take care of you." And Freeda said, Babaji said to her in return, "Tell her she is as dear to me as my own son."
Wow.
So,
So it was a very, yeah.
You couldn't get better than that.
No, you couldn't get closer than that.
No.
And as you say, so she's looking after her, caring for her as if she were her own mother through this extraordinary, tempestuous series of events that she's experiencing. I mean, first of all in Kashmir, and then in India, campaigning for independence and actually offering satyagraha at that point. Can you tell us about that extraordinary thing to do that, to actually volunteer herself to go to prison as she did? And we should say that Baba Bedi had actually been in prison at that point.
That's right. So in Lahore, they were part of a Bohemian left-wing nationalist circle. It wasn't that unusual for European women, wives, to be part of that circle. Freeda once estimated there were 200 European and American women in Lahore married to Punjabis who perhaps had either studied or worked abroad, being lawyers and things like that. What was unusual was that Freeda took to the platform. So her husband was a political activist. They published a really good quarterly review. She became a human rights activist. He became a peasant activist. He was very much engaged in the All India Kisan Sabha. He was also a communist apparatchik. By that you mean the Communist Party was illegal at that time, but Baba Bedi just loved the subterfuge, and he was a good apparatchik. Freeda may have joined the party at some time, it's not entirely clear, but she had much more of a moral, aesthetic, political sense. When war was declared, Baba Bedi was part of a group of communists who tried to disrupt military recruitment, which was really important for the British Indian Army in Punjab, and he was basically interned in Deoli, an army camp, former army camp in Rajasthan. In response to that, Freeda did something, she got a child by now, did something which is almost sort of really quite remarkable. So rather than think, I've got a child whose father's just been jailed, she said, I too will go to jail. And she was a satyagrahi, so she was part of the Gandhi's campaign, in which she said, I'm going to challenge the emergency war regulations and I dare you to arrest me. And actually what happens is, once you denounced you're going to challenge them, you got arrested in any case. So you didn't have to actually break the war regulations. You just had to say that you would. And she spent 3 months in Lahore female jail, which she campaigned to be renamed Lahore Women's Jail, because she said Lahore female jail is grammatically incorrect. And she left behind a really wonderful 50-page jail diary, very personal diary. The political prisoners were able to organise. Aruna Asaf Ali was there at the same time, so they had May-Day rallies inside the jail. But she was also jailed with hard labour, though in her case it meant supervising prison gardens, and she didn't have to do any of the work because the criminal women prisoners actually did the work. But she got to know the criminal women prisoners and got to tell their stories. Most of them, it seems, were in for murdering their husband. And the collective wisdom among them is if you had a really bad and abusive husband, the best thing to do was to kill him.
Very, very sympathetic laughter, I noticed at the audience. But so she took a very active role, even in prison. She was an activist. Even there, she was organising, she was campaigning, she was driving things forward. She wasn't someone who was ever going to just sit there and accept her fate.
That's right, throughout, all the way through. I mean, she was shouting Inqilab Zindabad at the moment she was arrested, and she was shouting it still, and she heard the political prisoners who were already in their cells shouting it when she was brought into the women's jail. She gave a lecture on the Soviet Union to the women inside the jail. She talked about the history of May Day, and she says, I mean, jails were colleges quite often for political prisoners, for nationalist prisoners, and she made strong friendships, and she learned a lot. She learned from the women that she was sharing a cell and sharing an exercise yard with, and there was a real sense of solidarity, which she found deeply nourishing. And the difficulty was that she was obviously separated from her son, which she found immensely difficult. Yes.
I had a different take on the jail diary, I have to say. I found it quite amusing, almost like a comedy. I found that it wasn't, she was garlanded with flowers as she left Darabab. She arrived on a train with, she couldn't help but attract notice. She was a white woman dressed in a beautiful sari and looked very beautiful. And when she got down from the train and started her satyagraha, they didn't know how to arrest her because she was a white woman, and so they had to send for a special officer from Amritsar to come and, because how would a Western woman react? That's what they said. And she reports this in her diary, so I think she was looking very candidly at herself as well. I found it a very interesting self-portrait. And they gave her a prison sentence of 6 months, which was then shortened to 3 months. And the rigorous labor was basically, garden work, which she liked anyway. And they celebrated every holiday that there was to celebrate. They even sat outside in the garden and ate ripe mulberries. And on May Day, they read Lenin, and continually they were reading Steinbeck and Huxley. I mean, it was, as Andrew said, it was an educational place, but she wasn't in there for any other purpose than just to make a statement, So when she got out, she was suddenly elevated to the status of a radical firebrand. And I thought this was kind of amusing because she wasn't actually a radical firebrand in terms of that jail sentence, although she had a lot of courage to do it. But she had Trilok Das, her brother-in-law, providing the money for the family, and she had Babaji looking after Ranga. So she actually covered all the bases before she went into prison. So I thought that it was, in today's terms of going to prison, no, it didn't cover.
It was no great hardship.
It was monsoon wedding rather than the Gulag Archipelago. They were dancing and banging drums and celebrating, eating delicacies. I mean, what? It was sort of like a commune of radical women, elite radical women.
But you actually made the point that she's separated from her son at that point. In this sense, rings a very significant bell, because later on, of course, she would elect again in a much more significant and profound way to be separated from her family. I'd like to actually move on to that conversion story, if I may, which I think is very interesting. And there was this moment, she's working for the United Nations Social Services Commission for Burma at this point. And how old is she then?
In her mid-40s.
Yeah. Mid-40s. So
she's still a lay person.
She has a lay person. But she has, I'm confusing my religions here, but she has this sort of Damascene awakening literally on the path. She's walking down the street in Burma and she has this enlightenment experience, which is quite extraordinary. Can you
I'll just say something, but he's not there. Just wait 1 minute and then I'll tell you to put on that tape.
So we have her voice.
We have her voice describing this moment.
Just tell us, introduce us, tell us what happened exactly on the road in Burma.
Yes, she had never met up really with Buddhism in its own place. Although she lived in India, Buddhism was very much underground. You know, the damage that was done to Buddhism by the Muslim invasions and so on, it was still there. So there was really not much trace of Buddhism in India at that time. And then when she went to Burma, well, it was a Buddhist country, and she went into this temple and found a teacher. I think he was called Utitila, and he was, you know, considered a great Vipassana master, and he taught her meditation. And after a couple of weeks, she was on the road somewhere in Akyab. I don't know where that is exactly, but anyway, somewhere outside of Rangoon, and quite away. And suddenly she fell to the ground, unconscious. Then she described that experience as a flash of understanding, which she had never had before. And it was like the gate of the mind was unlocked, and she saw reality as it was, not through the ego. The ego dropped away, and she had an experience of interdependence, which is basically called shunyata, the Sanskrit word shunyata, in Buddhism. So it's an experience of emptiness, but it's not the voidness of blankness, it's the fullness of everything, the fullness, because your ego isn't interpreting it anymore. So this is always an opening, you know, but it's a flash of understanding, and it is not the recognition, you know, it's not a stable state, so it goes away. But she spent a month coming back to who she had been before, but she was never quite the same. I mean, coming back to her senses, you can say, you know. She spent months not talking, not doing very much, staring at the wall, but her husband, BPL, had to go to Burma to bring her back.
It was seen as a nervous breakdown.
It was, it was interpreted as a nervous breakdown, but in my book I called it breakthrough. I called it a breakthrough. So because BPL had been in prison for such a long time, he didn't have a passport, he didn't have any travel documents, so he went to Nehru. And Nehru did everything, ticket, passport, everything, and he went and brought her back to the family. And then she came back without any, you know, psychiatric help or medication or anything else. Suddenly she was back again.
So many years later, by which time she's a nun living in Bruntek Monastery in Sikkim, a friend of hers from Oxford comes to see her, takes this very, very long conversation about her life and her story, and she talks about it. So we can hear a bit of her voice.
Her voice, to me, was a very big awakening for me, because I thought it was the most extraordinary voice I'd ever heard. It was a very quiet, gentle voice, and very soft, but it had an extraordinary quality, which you'll now hear.
It's very interesting to be able to see pictures of her here. Please. While we're waiting for the audio. Yeah.
So the context of, the wider context and what was happening in her life when she went to Burma is that the family had to leave Kashmir in a bit of a hurry. They'd had a row with Sheikh Abdullah. Sheikh Abdullah was politically facing a difficult time. And the years in Kashmir were the only time when Baba Bedi had a regular income. So the reason why she went to Burma was because the family was skint and she needed the money. And it was the first, by then she had 3 children and she left all her 3 children behind. And it was a moment of great spiritual awakening which changed her life. But one of the, I mean, the marriage was in some difficulties by this time. Bedi had a touch of the, he was a fairly entitled guy, a bit like that. He almost certainly had an affair with Margaret Hawke White, and that wasn't the only one. So when Freeda came back, she decided that she would take vows of brahmacharya, which would normally include celibacy. So basically she was very probably celibate from the moment of her enlightenment in Burma, even though she didn't take formal vows as a novice nun until 13 years later.
Right.
What's that to me?
Perhaps this isn't going to happen. We'll carry on talking while we enjoy the pictures that are coming up. I mean, having taken these vows, the next...
Start at the beginning if you want. I don't mind. Just see if it goes from the beginning. It's just to give you an idea of her voice.
Just to give you a flavour of the voice.
It plays on my plays fine. So anyway.
Having taken these vows, I mean, then obviously the next step. Well, there's a couple of intermediary steps. She becomes very, very involved in the cause of Tibetan refugees coming across the border into India from Tibet, and kind of relief and help of Tibetan refugees. And then starts this thing called the Tibetan Lama School and Lama School, and that in turn then leads to her actually taking vows as a nun. One of the things that interests me about that is having been, as you say, Andrew, having been a communist, self-affiliated, married to a communist, the reason Tibetan refugees are coming from Tibet is because of the communist government. Did she see, how did that square with her? Did she ever talk about that? Did she ever renounce communism in the light of her move towards Tibetan Buddhism and the Tibetan cause, embracing the Tibetan cause?
She never directly renounced communism, but she had long since abandoned it by the time she was active in the Tibetan cause. And she was clearly aware that it was a communist party, the Chinese Communist Party, which...
50. Unity for 6 months with the United Nations Social Services Planning Commission. It was very interesting. And because I had to go 6 months, I had to leave my family behind for a short period. So I had more time to meditate. And while I was there, I met a most remarkable Buddhist teacher. Actually a very remarkable monk who had been in England for 14 years and through the last war had been in ARP and a few other things, who really understood England and who was a very sensible person. And he taught me meditation on my request. And it was then that after about 8 weeks, I got my first flash of understanding. Not quite more than that. But it changed my whole life. I felt that really this meditation had shown me what I was trying to find. Something of it at least I understood. And I got great, great happiness. Feeling that I found the path. So I really didn't know much about Buddhism at that time. And I felt that the Buddha had been what we call Tomba Lame in Tibetan, which means the leader supreme or the guide supreme. And that therefore I should take the Buddhist faith. So I told my family about it, and everybody was very understanding. And I became Buddhist. That was in 1953. Then in 56, His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to Delhi. There was a lot of Buddhists from all over the world.
Wow, that's a voice carrying across the years.
No sign of a Derby accent, by the way.
No sign of a Derby accent.
I think she must have.
We haven't covered half of her life. I mean, it's such an extraordinary subject. Distressingly, we're running towards the end of our time. I did want to throw it open because I'm sure there are some people who have questions. So if anybody does have questions, and then of course Norma and Andrew will be here afterwards if you want to press on more with questions. Is there anybody that has a question that they'd like to address? Anybody? No, nobody has a question. Well, that's good. Ask another question because I certainly have a question. So, yeah, well, I wanted to come to exactly about her death. Just leading up to that, what should explain is she became a nun and became very close, unusually close, uniquely close to her Lama, this man called Singh who's an extraordinary figure, one of the heads of the Kagyu, the head of the Kagyu school of Buddhism. Great miracle worker in Tibetan mythology. Tibetan Buddhism being a very patriarchal society, of course, a very patriarchal system, she uniquely occupied this position at his right hand as his confidant, supporter, almost consigliere, you might say, organized his trips to the West for the first time. It's quite a remarkable story in itself. And then had this, when she died, had this a very extraordinary death, which within Tibetan Buddhism is seen to indicate a very special position, a very special degree of realization. Am I right in saying that?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Can you just tell us briefly about
yes,
that?
I mean, all these, you know, all those years when, after Pema Zangmo told me about her death, her miraculous death, I just didn't know whether it was true or not. Then many years later, as I said, I went to see Ranga. I asked him about it, and he confirmed that her body did not go into rigor mortis after 3-4 days. It was March in Delhi when she died in a hotel room at the Oberoi Hotel in room 146. This was her, due to her best friend, Goody Oberoi, who reserved that room for her, and it was her kind of, you know, place where she settled in Delhi. I don't mean when she came back from room tech from the monastery, she would take little breaks then. And she, it's hard to know whether she knew about her death, but she seemed to have planned it in a way because she had meetings before and settled everything with the Friends of Tibet and all the societies that she belonged to, and made statements like, you know, you should do this or you should do that after I'm gone, to her attendant. Anyway, nobody was expecting this because she had just had a checkup, although she had a bad heart, or she had a weak heart, I should say, from, you know, from middle age onwards. And she went to a cardiologist in Mumbai, or Bombay at the time, and had a complete checkup, and he said there's nothing wrong with your heart right now. So she went, she was going to a Buddhist conference that was due to happen the next day, and as usual, she was doing her prayers at night. She sat up sat up in meditation. And when Pema Zangmo, her attendant, walked into the room next, she heard some sort of like slight coughing, some sound, and she went into her room and she found that Freeda was sitting up in meditation, but she was gone. She had passed away. So this is unusual because if somebody is sitting and they die, they fall down, but she didn't fall down. And she stayed like that for quite a long time. The doctors did come, and they actually asked for her blessing. What did they call her? Mahatma, they called her Mahatma. Indians always understanding something very holy is going on. So they didn't disturb the body, and they called the children, Ranga and Kabir, came the next morning. Her body had been moved to their cousin's, Binder's house. There was ice around it. Still, there was no sign of any decay. And when they took her to Goody Oberoy's farmhouse to cremate her, there was, her body was supple, completely supple. There was warmth around the heart, as Ranga said. And she had some white sweat on her brow, which is a sign of nectar. So I still didn't know when I got to the end of my research. I had to find Aang Rinpoche, who had taught her the consciousness transference practice called POA. And in this practice, if you attain the result of the practice, you can direct your consciousness through the crown chakra and attain enlightenment. So I asked him about it, and I just want to quote what he said, because for me it clarified everything. I think I can find it. Oh no. Okay, he said, Tukdam is the name for a corpse in which some characteristics of a live body are present. The body is malleable, not stiff. The body does not rot, does not smell. The white sweat that occasionally appears on the brow is nectar, and sometimes remains sitting as she did. In the teaching, these special signs are mentioned. All the signs are that she attained the highest level. Sister Homo, he continued, was like the bridge between Tibetan Buddhism and Westerners. Everything she did was successful. If she reincarnated, her work will have continued. If she has reincarnated, it will have shown and people will know. But nobody requested it. She is already born, already grown up. Who knows? Freeda Bedi was first a worldly lady. Finally, she became a great spiritual lady. She was great, not an ordinary lady. She was definitely a tulku, or emanation. I believe she was a Dakini.
Wow.
So,
I mean, it's an extraordinary, what an extraordinary life this is. And so many people, I was thinking of this coming here on the tube soon, so many people squander their lives and waste their lives. And here's an example of somebody who led such a directed and conscious and rich life, not only rewarding to herself, but rewarding to the world in so many different aspects, socially, politically, spiritually. Truly, truly extraordinary woman. I'm sorry, yes, sorry, yes. Oh, suddenly everybody wants to ask a question. Yes.
Time's up.
And our time's up. One more, come on.
I thought it was absolutely remarkable what you said about Freeda. I didn't know much about it. Of course, I know Kabir very well, but I just wondered where exactly did you do being a historian and a researcher? Where did you do your research from, and where did you get the most data? Was it India? Was it Oxford? Was it England? Was it the Buddhist place?
I went,
still
I
must
know I did
congratulate
different research actually, but just say briefly, I researched everywhere. England, I went to her home. I went to Oxford. I looked in their archives. They had archives there which described different years in which Freeda was there, and it was sort of like diaries of different people, so I researched that. Then, because I'm in the same kind of lineage with the Karmapas as Freeda was, I knew a lot of the people who had known her when she was teaching. She was also teaching. She was given transmission by the Karmapa, and she taught very esoteric practices, and some very ordinary as well, but you know, she was considered a lama, actually, by him. Although she wasn't called that, and I don't think she wanted any titles or any credit or anything like that. So I did a lot of my research just by being, you know, what I've been following for so many years and contacting people. And I had just written a book on the 16th Karmapa, so I had a lot of contacts in place to go back to her students and get stories from them about her. So,
Andrew,
but Andrew went into...
Yeah, but very different, coming from a very different perspective, as we were saying.
Yeah.
we were both very fortunate we had access to the substantial archive that the family has, both Ranga and Kabir. So they've got baby books for all 3 children, which Freeda and her husband compiled. They've got a fantastic photographic archive. They've got not just letters in, they've got some letters out. So Kabir's still thinking about making a film about his mother, so they actively collected material. But apart from that, I mean, in terms of, you know, I went through the Oxford daily papers for signs of political activity, went through various archives. When Freeda was in, just one small thing, when Freeda was in Lahore, she wrote a lot for the daily paper there, the Nationlist daily paper, the Tribune, which after partition moved to Chandigarh. There is not a single copy in the UK that I've found of the Tribune from its Lahore days, but I got in touch with the editor of the paper in Chandigarh and said, I don't suppose you've got any copies from the Lahore days, do you? And he got back in touch to say, we have a full set, and it's just been digitised. We haven't made it available as yet, but if you want to send somebody up, because I was based in London. So I sent a researcher up from Delhi, and she came back in 4 days with a pen drive with 300 articles by or about Freeda and her husband. So you get lucky breaks like that, but it all adds to the richness of the story.
Absolutely.
Why so many books on Freeda at this point of time?
Because the family opened up the archives, I think that's the answer.
Okay.
I think the answer is the family decided to do it, and really do it. And I have to say that Kabir has got the film rights for my book, and will be making a film.
Sorry, Madam, you said Madam.
It's been interesting to hear that the families opened up their archives, but how has your sort of your approach to life inspired the children in terms of intellectual curiosity, spiritual curiosity, engaging in politics? Have our children been inspired? Have they followed through on any of that approach to life?
Well, Kabir was the closest to her, and he, spent a little time in Burma with her, and became a monk for a short time, a novice monk. And it was because, he wanted to learn meditation also, and I think he still practices meditation. But I don't think he would call himself a Buddhist. And the closest one to her after that is Ami, the daughter of Ranga. And she feels very strongly about her grandmother and feels her presence frequently in her life. But I think all the children feel her presence, but none of them are really Buddhist.
Time for one more.
I know, because we've got so many panels,
Yeah. No. Well, it's your call. So we have to wrap it up now?
I think so, we've had enough.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's lunchtime, but
I'm sorry,
anybody wants to
Well, I think you've answered my question.
Oh, you answered the question.
Because I was just going to ask, I was in college with Kabir, etc. What was their relationship like with their children? Because that was never touched.
Well, they love their parents. They all say that they couldn't have had more wonderful parents. And I believe that. Even though I think Louis felt a little bit shortchanged when her mother became a nun and she was only, I don't know, what was she? What age was she?
66, she'd be 15.
15. So, she was the only one that suffered a bit. But then she says she got over it. And as you do, you grow up and you think, well, my mother's made the right choice. And in a sense, I always understood why Freeda said, who can tell the apple when it's time to fall from the tree? She had gone through life and she reached the point of renunciation and she wanted to become a nun and serve her guru. She gave everything to her children, I think, even though she was a political activist, but she gave as much as she possibly could. She had love for them, definitely. And he's another story, but she was 66 when she died. She was 66 when she died. She was 50-something when she became a nun. When she became a nun.
She was 42 when she went to Burma.
But then when she became a nun, it was later. 55. Yeah.
Okay, listen, I'm sure you all agree it's been a fascinating discussion, and we really do owe a huge debt of thanks to